All right, thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. We have a great roundtable put together, and we're going to be focusing on what it takes to successfully deploy and conversational AI and virtual assistants within the African market, and also talk about the acceleration of these experiences and solutions within the marketplace. We have an esteemed panel here of colleagues from around the industry. Ravi Govender from Nedbank is joining us. Ravi is a digital executive and a conversational banking lead at the bank. We have Justin Arnoldi from Blue Turtle, and he heads digital transformation there. We have my colleague, Sasha Caskey, who's CTO and co-founder here at Casisto, and myself, Stephen Epstein, who's the Chief Marketing Officer, and I'll be moderating the session today. So as we get into the topics here, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to spend a minute or so talking about their function and what they focus on within their organization. So the audience has some general context in terms of our background and really what we're focused on as we go through these discussion topics. But before we do that, I'd like to kind of open up the first topic here, the first question for the panel. So within the African market specifically, I'd like to talk a little bit about, what's influencing digital adoption in banking. Just to kind of set some context here, generally speaking, in the financial services industry, digital banking, adoption of digital self-service is absolutely accelerating globally. The pandemic has played a significant role in this. Obviously, when it's difficult to contact and touch your customer through the banking experience, through the branch, we need to find other ways to create these meaningful connections and to help service banking customers. So this is a trend globally, but within the African market, there are also other trends that really are driving the acceleration of digital banking and the adoption of technologies like conversational AI and virtual assistants. So with that said, I'd like to open this up actually, Ravi, with you, because I think you're deep in this right now as part of working on this within Nedbank, and love to get your perspective on why we see this acceleration of digital banking within the African market. What do you think some of the underlying driving forces are, and how do you see it going?
Sure, and thanks very much for having us. I think that when you think about the adoption of digital banking financial services in Africa, you first need to take a step back and think about it's the adoption of digital and certainly connectivity. And customers are getting online predominantly because they are adopting mobile. In Africa, the adoption, the getting of people online is very much driven by the mobile revolution and by vast mobile penetration. We've sort of skipped the desktop phase and moved into that. And so that adoption of digital and adoption of mobile is actually, I think, what is driving a greater adoption of financial services, because it's making financial services, whether you're talking about banking, payments, other types of capabilities, it's making it far more accessible than it previously was. And certainly it's playing a driving role in that. So I think we've probably, whilst there's certainly a large number of existing customers who are moving through the more traditional path of, they've been long-standing customers of banks, they've gone through the branch phase and the ATM phase and certainly online banking, and now they're starting to move on to mobile and apps. We've also got a large number of users who would have been the unbanked and certainly not making use of traditional financial services, but who have now found that to be far more accessible.
That's great, Ravi. So I'd like to switch the question over to you also, Justin. And I appreciate Blue Turtle, your organization focuses on digital transformation across many banks in your region. So you probably have a perspective that, spans many of these financial institutions. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Also talk a little bit about what you focus on, and really how Blue Turtle is kind of seeing this evolution in the African market from a conversational banking perspective.
So it's an interesting one for us because I think Blue Turtle as a business itself is trying to stay relevant in the market. And I think that's what digital transformation at its core is actually about, is large-scale customers remaining relevant to their client base. And that's kind of one of the key drivers that we see in the market today, is that relevance piece. So most of the clients we engage with from a banking perspective are actually looking at the market and saying, how do we create a differentiated service to actually entice customers to us? You know, it's all good and well, you know, having reduced fees and what have you, but that only gets you so far. It doesn't really get you up the chain of engaging your clients in a far more meaningful way. You know, as we know, the younger generations coming through, millennials and what have you, you know, they're multi-bank. You know, so how do you know, where your father banked before, it's not necessarily where you're going to bank today as an individual. You really are looking for differentiated services that are similar to the native apps that you use, that you get from the iStore or from the Play Store for that matter. So, you know, the generations coming through are looking for those consistent experiences from traditional organizations like banks and insurers for that matter. So I think Blue Turtle's role in that really is to look at those cutting edge technologies that are really disrupting markets globally and look to actually represent them here on the continent, and actually take those relationships, be there a startup in New York, similar to Kazisto, to our existing customers like a NetBank, and actually explain how it would fit and how it could embrace, you know, their transformation journey. So we're a boutique SI. You know, we're not of the ilk of an Accenture or Deloitte, and we focus on niche trends that haven't quite hit mainstream yet. So from a conversational AI perspective, you know, we've been working in this space for sort of, feels like for a lot longer, but it's going on 4 years. And it was a large investment on our part, actually investing ahead of the curve, looking at the research around what's driving adoption specifically in chat and these additional channels. So yeah, that's our role from that perspective. But I think particular to from a banking perspective, it's that relevance piece. You know, how are banks remaining relevant to existing customers as well as new clients?
So I guess as part of being relevant, you also mentioned something earlier, and that was really this focus on engagement. Obviously, being relevant helps to promote engagement, but a big part of conversational banking and conversational AI and this wave and drive towards digital adoption is really to drive engagement and to create very meaningful connections with customers. And we'll talk about what that means from a demographic perspective in a few minutes. You know, I just like to reinforce that point, and let's stick with that point also through this conversation, that I think engagement is a real serious driver in terms of why conversational AI and virtual assistants and conversational banking is picking up a lot of momentum in the African market, but also globally too. So with that in mind, you know, Sasha, I'd like to move the conversation to you. You know, you and I work together, you know, daily. You're driving our technology strategy and force here at Kazisto. You've watched conversational AI evolve over the past many years, from I think its infancy to some real maturity now. How do you think like the state of the tech today is helping to kind of drive this move and acceleration, generally speaking, not just in the African market, but you know, how is the technology evolving, and is it being made easier to use? It's an AI technology. Is that helping to accelerate adoption? What in your mind is some of those technology, I would say, attributes and effects that is helping to kind of accelerate this adoption?
Right, that's a really good question, Stephen. I think, you know, sort of tying back what Ravi and Justin were saying, where the availability of devices being sort of broad and vast, where folks are now in many areas and in many generations skipping the computer completely and doing most of their computing needs from a mobile phone. and they end up using their phone for everything but for making phone calls, which is, you know, what us old folks had traditionally used our phones for. And they're looking for, you know, they're used to having things always available to them. And they're looking for innovative ways of interacting with their brands and their products. And you know, we feel that with all the advances that we've had in the past, you know, really 20 years, but more specifically, even in the past 5 years, around the area of natural language understanding and conversational, which were brought out by a variety of factors, everything from the maturing of neural net technologies to just the vast availability of compute power with services like AWS and Azure and many other services, to just the vast availability of data. We have data like we have never had before in our history. And when you put these three elements together and you combine them, it's really allowed the technology to leap, to be able to do so much more and do it in a way that's economically feasible. So you don't have to hire 1,000 PhDs and engineers to make it work, but also where you're getting like big benefits. And I think at Ecosystem, we really focus on finding the right balance of technology and experience to offer to our customers, where we are, you know, taking advantage of these great technological leaps, but we don't lose track of what's important to the users of our technology, to the experiences that they are having while they're using our products, right? Because for us, it's really about taking complex products like the ones that exist in banks and making them accessible in a very human way to the users, and taking advantage of these technology leaps to make that happen.
That's great. And we're going to talk more about technology, and I'd like to kind of revisit the point later in the conversation in terms of how, you know, a complicated AI technology like ours is being made a lot simpler, and yet at the same time is being made more powerful. And I know those ideas kind of contradict each other, but, you know, taking it from the hands of a data scientist and putting it in the hands of a business, you know, owner or knowledge worker to actually write a conversational experience using, you know, a user interface, the state of the art is moving in that direction very rapidly. So we'll talk more about it. I know that's an area that you're really passionate about. But let's get back to the experience itself. Sasha, you mentioned experience, so let's stick with the topic. But let's kind of mix it up a little bit. And what I mean by that is the banking or the customer demographic seems to be also playing a real role in the acceleration of this technology and these experiences in the industry. And what we mean by that is these younger banking demographics, these younger banking customers, as you said, they're not using their phones to make phone calls. They're using their phones as their means to conduct their life, their you know, their compute platform. You know, you can put it many different ways. But I think within the African market itself, it's not only about a younger banking demographic, it's about a banking demographic that is just actually quite digitally savvy and digitally demanding. I don't think we see this in every region of the world, and I think it's really unique for us to explore that in this conversation. So Ravi, I'm gonna, you know, reboot the conversation back to you and love to get your perspective on, again, the African market, the different banking demographics, the demand around digital. How are you seeing it? And do you see it as a challenge or an opportunity?
I think that it has to be seen as, for an existing business, for a long-standing business such as ours, it has to be seen as both. It's both it certainly is a challenge and it's an opportunity. And where the opportunity also comes from is us being pushed by our existing customers and by the market to keep up with their demands, and certainly to try and, where possible, keep up, where possible, lead them in terms of being able to be the first to bring the art of the possible into the table. And yes, absolutely, Africa is, the countries in Africa, a lot of them do have higher numbers of younger cohorts of younger demographic
Right.
customers who are certainly growing up as digital natives. But we're also seeing significant and highly demanding adoption from older, more experienced customers who, like I said, would have gone through the trajectory of all the various other channels and are certainly taking to digital very well. And the demands that they're now putting on us are to say, look, we are quite happy to do it. We are all very comfortable. And it's interesting, this last year, it's been an accelerant in terms of a lot of older customers would now be far more au fait with using video technology, for example, to chat to their grandkids in other parts of the country, etc. So you also have to keep up with those sorts of demands. And those customers are now saying to us, okay, we would be willing to take up your new technology and your new capabilities that you're offering us, but you have to make sure that it's easy to use. You've got to make sure that it's a world-class experience, because if we're willing to shift from our existing way of banking to a new channel, to a new platform, to our mobile banking on our mobile phones, well, we might also consider banking on our mobile phones with a new competitor, with one of the newer banks who's starting to emerge in our markets. So that's also a challenge. It's making sure that you are not just giving customers the digital capability, but you're delivering it in such a way that it really feels like a world-class experience that they're not just comfortable and trusting of, but actually enjoy using. And so those are some of the things that we think about every day. There's a limited number of megapixels on a phone screen. Sometimes the phones are growing, sometimes they're shrinking. It's hard to keep up with that. But certainly what that means for us is when you're starting to think about trying to fit in all the various capabilities that we have as a bank, you've got to be very thoughtful around how you develop that user interface and experience. And conversational banking plays a significant role for us in terms of helping to achieve that.
Yeah, I think there's also an opportunity in terms of some level of skepticism, right? So if an end user, hits a conversational channel, and they'll say to themselves, is this actually going to work? And if you surprise and delight them, you earn their trust right away. But to your point, Ravi, if you don't do that, it could be a means to an end. So getting this right is a lesson for all of us. Conversational AI, brings tremendous opportunity. And if it's leveraged well, if it's implemented well, if the experience is outstanding, it's such an amazing opportunity to build such brand loyalty and trust, and to lock really important customers into your product ecosystem. So and that's true globally, not just in Africa, for sure. But let's stick with this topic of demographic. And Justin, I'd like to get your perspective. Again, you see this more horizontally or a broader spectrum across many banks. Do you think that many financial institutions within your region see it the same way, or are there different levels of, I would say, engagement in terms of bringing on this type of technology based on the demand from this demographic?
It's quite an interesting one, because the uptake has been relatively slow in some of the more mature banks that we've been working with. So there's a lot of convincing that has to take place. And I think there could possibly be, Nedbank excluded out of the discussion, but it comes almost a disconnect between the senior executives within the bank and the understanding of the demographic and the customer need. And that sounds like quite a harsh statement, and I appreciate that. But I think it's a key point to note, because customers actually required to be serviced across the channels that they're in. Younger demographics would like to use something like WhatsApp, for instance. If you think of something like USSD and the short codes, those are pioneered in Africa. If you pick up any book around digital transformation, you'll see the use case, around Mshwari or M-Pesa out of Kenya. I mean, these are key things that have been driving digital on the continent for a number of years now. The concepts of mobile wallets, they've been in Africa forever. So I think there's been this massive groundswell that's been happening, and it's really just been demanding these rich services. And I think conversational AI presents us with an opportunity to use natural language across these channels in a far more easier, user-friendly manner that's kind of always on. So the opportunity is definitely there. And if you look at the history of USSD, for instance, it's naturally progressed into what we have today across something like WhatsApp. I'd be interested to actually see the demographics of users using Facebook, for instance, and that would actually look at an experience in Facebook Messenger, data privacy aside. But that would be interesting to see those stats, to see just what kind of demographic would gravitate towards a WhatsApp, and that to a Facebook Messenger, and then your traditional in-app user. I mean, I think that again, that engagement piece in these channels is kind of pivotal. And I think it is, it stems from generations. If you look at what the particular demographic would be, there would be a channel of choice, and they would naturally gravitate to those that they are used to using day in, day out. I mean, it's a natural thing that will take place. So yeah, I'm quite excited about what's to come in this space. And I think the AI is where it needs to be. I mean, absolutely, there's massive opportunity here to actually further expand the usage of these platforms.
Yeah, that's great. Sasha, why don't we explore that question, but from a different perspective? I know you spend a lot of time in data. You mentioned earlier in the conversation the amount of data that is now available to help train and reinforce these AI models is fantastic. And I know you personally and your team spends a lot of time looking at the data. From a demographic perspective, from a needs perspective, from a demand perspective, can you share with us some stories in terms of the types of data or the types of questions and conversations we see in the data that helps us to understand what type of people are interested in these types of banking experience? What are some of their bigger questions? And what I mean by all this, and I think you'll know where I'm going with this, is earlier in 2020 when COVID hit, we were just looking at our own data, and we just saw globally the types of questions coming in had nothing or very little to do with banking. But then over time it evolved, and the COVID questions were quite relevant to banking. And as well, the epidemic became a pandemic, we saw these questions kind of maturing across the globe. But the data presented us with a story. It was clear to us people were concerned about the pandemic and how it was going to affect, their financial needs and their financial services, and they were asking questions. In the context of this question, generally speaking, from a demographic perspective, from a banking customer perspective, what other types of things do we see in the data that would kind of provide strong evidence that people just want to bank more conversationally than they ever did before?
Right. So
I know
that's
I'm putting you on the spot, and so think
no,
about it.
it's okay. Yeah. It's okay. It's a really good question, and I'm happy to talk about it. Like you said, we spend a lot of time collecting data, studying our data. We look at our data from multiple angles, right? So part of how we look at our data is we measuring the performance. How well are our virtual assistants answering the questions that the users are asking, and providing the services that they need in a performance way. We look at data around our virtual assistants. What's the coverage? Or do the virtual assistants actually, are they covering enough of what the users are asking? Another way that we look at data is we look at what type of users are using our systems, right? And when they come and they interact with us, are they an observer? Are they a questioner? Are they a transactor, right? And we have 4 different roles that we classify the users in, and we use that to help us understand the type of people that come in and interact with the virtual assistants. And we even look at transitions, how they transition from, a questioner into a transactioner, and so on and so forth. And, it's very common for us to see that for most of our applications, we observe patterns in usage, like you mentioned earlier. So maybe someone comes in and they start a conversation with, how much money do I have? And then they grow that conversation into, well, but is my paycheck in yet? You know, because that's really what they're interested in. When is their paycheck in? Has it cleared? Or when is it, you know, when did the last paycheck come in, so that they can make a prediction of when the next one will come in. And you know, bringing it back to the COVID conversation and what happened to all of us there, we just saw we saw a massive spike across all of our deployments around the world. I mean, we just saw the volume grow, and our system alarms started popping up all over the place, and you know, coverage alarms started popping up, and we said, oh wait, people are asking all about this new thing, COVID. Well, let's put some answers in there. And we quickly went and collected data from around the world, folded it back into our virtual assistants so that they could start responding to that. But what actually happened as time went by was that it wasn't just, you know, the effects of, are you closing your branches and when are they going to open again, or do you have new times? It transitioned more into, can I get a loan? Is there a way that I can not pay my credit card this month? And oops, I can't make my mortgage. You know, is there some way that you can help me?
Right.
So you really saw the customers reaching out at all hours of the day and coming into the bank and talking to it through this virtual assistant and asking really important and relevant questions to the situation that they were living at that time. And I think this helped us, you know, understand the importance of our system is not just something that is offering an innovative way of customers interacting, but something that's, you know, always there for the customer when they need it, and that can quickly shift to sort of accommodate for environmental or whatnot needs. And I don't know if that's where you wanted me to go,
that's
Steve,
great. No, that's great, because the point I really wanted to make here, which you've made, and I just want to kind of wrap it up, is, you know, people will ask a virtual assistant questions they may not naturally ask someone in a call center, or, you know, there's no harm done if you ask a virtual assistant something and you don't get an answer, right? But if you get an answer, that's even better. The point here is there's a great opportunity to kind of expose the voice of your customer with these conversational AI technologies. And if you have the means through your conversational AI platform like Instill to really understand, you know, what are the topics, what are the trends, you know, what's unknown, what's known, you really start to understand the true voice of your customer, understand what their needs are and what they're asking. A really good example would that be, you know, back on this whole notion of a banking demographic. A younger banking customer would have no problem asking a branch teller, can you help me with my investments? But, you know, us who have been a little bit more mature in our banking needs, we know that we don't necessarily go to a retail banker and ask about investment banking or about, you know, retirement, or maybe even insurance. And that changes from region to region. The point I think here is there's a great opportunity in data to understand what your customers need. And this whole notion of kind of exposing the voice of your customer through a conversational AI platform provides a great opportunity. And I think it's also a good segue to our next question, and that is really about being confident in the conversational channel. So, you know, if you're really going to get on board as a banking customer and start to ask a virtual assistant a lot of questions about, you know, your balances and your transactions and, you know, am I doing well in my finances or not? You have to have a lot of confidence that that channel is secure. You have to trust the channel. You have to make sure the channel, you know, provides everything you need. But at the same time, you really can't question, you know, the security around that channel. And I really would like to take this question actually back to Justin for a moment. And, you know, I appreciate USSD is, you know, a great way of securing these channels. But from your perspective, what else do banks need to do to ensure that these conversational channels are very secure and trusted and kind of instill confidence in the banking customer?
So I think the key thing there is always going to be authentication, right? So, I mean, two different types of transactions coming through the chat channel one that actually accesses your banking information, and one that's just about products, ATM locations, those kind of things. And I think it's that transition from unauthenticated to authenticated that that needs to be managed in the correct way, so that you've got the appropriate authentication mechanism to facilitate that natural transition. But again, the key thing there is to make sure that you're not introducing friction into that engagement. So I think that's absolutely pivotal, and that really goes down to the design of the solution, and that's kind of key. I mean, ultimately, we said it a couple of times, it's about engagement and about experience. So if you're doing that shift, you need to make sure that there's no friction to an authenticated, intent or discussion with the bank. And I think that's kind of key. Other elements around it too that we're seeing major discussion topics at the moment is the whole KYC process, understanding who's on the other side of the mobile device when you're actually transacting. And there's a whole bunch of data points that you can collect from the mobile device to identify the individual that's actually working with it. Obviously, fraud is a key element here. But again, there are a whole host of technologies that can be leveraged in conjunction with the AI processing, which run biometrics, for instance, voice, facial recognition, those kind of key things. And it's multiple bits of technology that can be leveraged in that same engagement process. If I'm in a chat channel and I'm talking about getting a loan, that's the perfect opportunity to convert that client and actually offer the product, but not offer it through, can I get an agent to call you back? What you want to do is onboard that client. And if you embed effectively the KYC process into the mobile device, identify the client, capture the appropriate information that you need to actually conclude the transaction, you can go through the process that way. And that is a complete seamless process. I mean, that is ultimately the holy grail of digital, I think. You want to do that completely remotely with no human in the loop. I mean, that's what we would aspire to from a full end-to-end engagement. And I think a lot of the technologies that are out there today have matured to facilitate that. There's a lot of examples.
I think customers are starting to expect that, right? That seamless transition between non-secure to secure and fulfillment. And it's just, I think in the consumer space, there's so many examples of that done so well that within banking, we absolutely have to learn from that and bring that same set of experiences. Sasha, I'm going to bring the conversation back to you for a moment here. Listen, I know here at Consisto, we spent a lot of time understanding unauthenticated and authenticated experiences, and even to the point that we've built technology and patented technology to help customers as they move from unauthenticated to authenticated, how they authenticate themselves so it's not a jarring experience, and when they are authenticated, they seamlessly come back to where they left off, and they can continue their journey in their virtual assistant. Do you want to talk a little bit about the role like technology is playing in terms of not just only instilling trust in the experience, but like technically, how are we handling some of those instances from unauthenticated FAQs to authenticated, experiences around account balances and loan fulfillment? What's some of that back-end technology that we like to use to make that a really seamless experience? Oh, and Sasha, you might want to come off mute.
Yeah. I was hoping not to get into that. There's some construction going on outside, so I was trying to prevent our listeners and viewers from having to participate in that. But that's a really good question and a very important one. And we spend a lot of time here at Consisto thinking not only about that transition of when you go, I agree with you that other industries like shopping, for example, have really done a great job at making this a seamless. You go into some random website, you put stuff in a cart, and then, you click checkout, and all of a sudden, okay, who are you? But all your stuff is in the cart, and your history is still there, and you don't just all of a sudden become a completely new person. So we obviously want to make sure that when you're talking to a virtual assistant before you've authenticated and you're interacting with it and learning about the products that the bank has to offer, and then you finally decide to, you know, access one of your accounts, that context and that history is there. So you don't feel like you just got transferred to another agent who has no idea of what's been going on. So we put a lot of thought into that. And as Stephen mentioned, we've actually filed patents around it. So a seamless way where you can transition from an unauthenticated into an authenticated experience. But I think we even went further than that. For many of our customers, they have been thinking about the different levels of authentication. So, you know, maybe, you know, you need a very simple authentication to go and get your balance, right? Because that's just a small piece of information. Or some banks, you don't need any authentication. You know, just the fact that they have seen you before and you have authenticated in the past is enough for them to let you see your balances. And you can start interacting with that. But then at some point, you want to start making movements of money. So you want to move money from one place to another. And our infrastructure allows you to trigger actually a second layer of authentication. So even though you've been sitting there talking, you know, anonymously to the virtual assistant, then all of a sudden you ask for your balance, says, oh, please authenticate yourself. Okay, Sasha, I know who you are. You have $5 in your savings account and $30 in your checking account. And now I'm like, well, all right, I'm gonna, you know, ask for some more money from my boss. So I'm like, so give me, you know, a few $1,000s. And it says, okay, we can do money movement, but you know, I just sent you a one-time password to your mobile phone. Can you enter that really quickly? And then you would put that in, and it would say, okay, this is really Sasha. He has known devices, and I'm going to allow him to ask for more money from his boss. And doing all this in a seamless way. The way that we build our virtual assistants, we abstract sort of all of the AI and conversational part of the virtual assistant from the systems that it needs to manipulate. And we create this abstraction of a Stripe-like interface that allows our virtual assistants to manipulate all of the banking cores in a way that respects these levels of authentication. So if a bank says, you know, you want to do a transfer, and I see that you're authenticated, but I want you to up level to a second level of authentication, it can send us back, it can return that to us in a message, and we will then start the protocol to, you know, collect that second level of authentication.
Yeah. But the big takeaway there is, as you think about deploying this type of experience, you need to think about the role security plays, not only from the perspective of securing the channel, but also from the perspective of making sure you're not creating friction and you're promoting, you know, seamless transitions from experience to experience without making the security protocol this big gating factor.
Exactly. And I think another important aspect that, you know, isn't focusing as much on the usability, but is important for information security groups and the IT organizations, is also how are you securing all of that data? And we've gone through enormous pains, if you will, to make sure that the data that we collect from the interactions with your users are properly anonymized and secured, as well as stored in a secure way so that they can't be breached or used to do things that they weren't intended for.
Yeah, of course. Great. Well, thank you for that, Sasha. So Ravi, why don't we bring the conversation back to you? We've talked a lot about customer experience. We've talked a lot about engagement from many different perspectives. Let's talk, if we can, a little bit about what other factors are driving the adoption of conversational AI in your marketplace, aside from the demands of the customer, which obviously are incredibly important. Operational factors, business factors, you know, the cost around potentially the call center or the opportunity to cross-sell, upsell products. Like, love to get from your perspective what other opportunities and what other kind of forces are driving the adoption of this tech within your region.
Yeah, I think first off, technologies such as this, we shouldn't fall into the trap of seeing them particularly and first and foremost from a cost lens. And certainly we see this not so much as a replacement technology for people, but actually as a way for us to enable and augment the people that we have, so that essentially chatbots and our digital and more automated engagement tools can actually enable a customer really, really quickly in their moment of need, saving up our capacity of our people to take on those tasks that people are best at. And by doing that, we actually get the best of both worlds. We actually, we're getting a just-in-time, always on, very, very useful customer experience whenever they need it, with the ability to seamlessly hand over to where there's a higher level of ambiguity, or where there are certain tasks that we feel are best handled by one of our human colleagues, the ability to then hand over and let the human colleague pick that up seamlessly, pick up where the bot left off, and be able to then engage and support the customer. And if we do it well, then we've helped take away waiting times, because then you don't have to wait for the colleague, because the colleague has actually got far more availability to handle that. So we see these technologies as being critical to augment our human workforce. At the same time, I don't think it's a surprise that our ability to serve the customer well through self-service mechanisms, and there can be no trade-off between the quality of the interaction and the quality of the service. But by doing that, it's clear that that is a far more cost-efficient way of dealing with particularly highly transactional types of activities. And at the same time, for a customer, if you can actually get something done out of the comfort of your home within a few seconds, and the safety and security is taken for granted, has to be there, then it makes a lot of sense for the customer, rather than having to get into a car, to go down to a branch, or to get on the phone and call into a contact center. It's faster, more efficient, it's cheaper, and certainly it's building more confidence for the customer. So I think that technology certainly offers us more efficient ways of dealing with certain tasks, but that actually enables us to then start to really look at what can we now do with the people that we have for customers that we were not able to do before because we were short on capacity.
Yeah, that's great. Your response reminds me of a panel we conducted last year on AI, conversational AI specifically, and one of the panelists said exactly the same thing you said, and he essentially said, listen, this is a labor augmentation opportunity. And he said, my knowledge workers have an opportunity, and we stopped the conversation right there because he used the term knowledge worker. And essentially these individuals within the bank are truly knowledge workers. They understand all about the bank's products. They have all this institutional knowledge, but I think unfortunately 80% of their time is used just on very mundane routine tasks where they don't have the opportunity to leverage all this knowledge for the benefit of the customer and the bank. And the more this technology can be used to free up their time, to your point, I think they're happier employees, they're providing greater value, and the customers, really respect what they have to offer. So the technology is it has so much opportunity internally and externally. So I'm really happy the way you kind of link that from a workforce augmentation perspective. I think that's really important. So thank you for that. So Justin, maybe we can come back to you. One of the questions I wanted to also tackle was, really when you talk to your customers in the market, obviously these conversations are taking place because they have an interest in these type of conversational AI technologies and virtual assistants. I would imagine through those conversations, you ask them, what does success look like? What are you trying to achieve? What are your core objectives? And when all this is done, what will you say is successful about it? Can you share with us some stories or perspectives in terms of what your clients see as success as they embrace and onboard these types of technologies?
Absolutely, and I think one of the key things, just on the back of what Ravi just said now, is that I find so interesting is that when we started out in this journey engaging with prospects, it is actually all about cost. It started out going down a cost road. It was about call containment, reducing the call volume to the call center. And what we couldn't quantify at that point in time was really the quality of the engagements coming through to the agents. And actually that piece, it was something we grappled with in all the business cases we put together. So if you ask the question, what does success look like? It's down to that word again. It's engagement. It's quality of the engagement with the customer. And I think that's kind of key. I mean, if you look at the augmentation side of it, and you're getting the chat capability addressing, 80, 90% of the mundane requests that actually people don't have to address. Yes, there might be a knockoff in terms of cost, but it's actually not relevant. The key thing is actually the quality of the engagement with the client in terms of solving what they're trying to achieve, and that's kind of key. So I think that is definitely something that's come through in probably in the last kind of 18 months, where it's really looking now about the quality of the service that's being offered, the level of maturity in the actual engagement. If a customer's asking, where's my closest ATM? The next possible question could be, well, where's the closest ATM for my actual bank, not a competitor bank, for instance. So there could be additional things that get put forward to the clients. And I think that's refining the engagements of actually working with the clients. I think definitely in the implementations we're seeing, there is a maturity that's happening. It's something that is iterative. It's not a one size fits all as you deploy. It's definitely something that evolves, and definitely that departure point of cost is actually isn't really where the value is, and that's not what success looks like.
That's right.
This is about actually delighting your customers in the engagement that you provide, and that's what I would say from that perspective.
That's great. We recently published a case study with one of our customers in Asia, and they started their journey exactly the same way you just described it. It was about call containment and cost. It was very important to them. But what they realized through the journey was they were actually seeing like significantly elevated levels of engagement on this channel. Upwards of 4x better engagement on this channel than all their other digital channels, which presented them an opportunity to then, promote and cross-sell products and actually generate revenue. So it went from a cost savings to a revenue generation opportunity within 12 months, which was an amazing outcome. But I think every financial institution has to kind of learn that through the journey. But I think it's an important takeaway. It's not just about call containment and cost. So that's great. Thank you, Justin. So Sasha, I'd like to bring this back to you. I'd like to kind of close the session off around this topic of technology, which is so near and dear to your heart. I think what we often see in the industry, and I'm sure this is true in the African market, so Ravi and Justin, if I got it wrong, just set me straight, but I think there's always some level of initial apprehension in terms of, oh, this is an artificial intelligent technology. This is complicated. I don't have the resources to onboard this and manage it and really nurture it over time. And I think that was true many, many, many years ago. And I know, Sasha, generally speaking, the industry, but also through your effort and your team's effort, so much has gone into simplifying this technology to make it so approachable and so much easier for banks to use without having, as you said earlier, 1,000 data scientists, which was an interesting comment you made. But regardless of the volume of data scientists, the notion of having to have data scientists to run a tech like this, could be a showstopper for a bank of any size. Love for you to talk about a little bit, how the technology has matured in I would say the past 36 months, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, from being something that you needed a data scientist to, open up a model and reinforce a model to, firing up a user interface and actually, uploading seed questions and having a model train itself. And I'd love for you to talk about how things have evolved so quickly in the past few years. And you'll have to come off mute one more time.
I said, I think we need another hour for this. There's just so
Well,
many
let's see if
things
you can do it
I
in
would
5
love
minutes.
I would love to talk about. Let me try to give a quick summary. So first, touching on the subject of, what does it do? What does it do? Do I need that army of people to build, deploy, and maintain this? And that being a thing of the past. I don't necessarily think that's a thing of the past yet. I think you need to be very careful if you use a generic infrastructure that was created to build any virtual assistants, everything from turning on your lights to shopping and a shopping experience. You will still have to do a lot of this management. You'd have to build out the entire virtual assistant that you're thinking about, but then maintain it. I think it's a very different experience than if you go with, a pre-built virtual assistant that's sort of specialized for your domain, right? So you don't have to have all of that knowledge around the user experience, the natural language understanding, the conversational interactions. You kind of start from a place. And then also, how are these tools and these platforms built to help you maintain, sort of day one, right? Getting to day one is really hard and can be really expensive depending on how you decide to get to day one. But often people forget, okay, now I'm in day one. What do I do to get to day 365, right? How am I going to maintain these systems and make sure that they're keeping up, that they're adjusting to the users, that they're actually listening to their customers and making sure that they're covering their needs and answering their questions. So a lot of what we focus here in Casisto in our tools and our AI is not just, along with building these specialized virtual assistants, it's really once you launch that virtual assistant, we want to make sure that it's learning the language of your customers. So our systems are built in a way that they continuously learn and adapt to the users that are using them. We want to make sure that our platform is letting you know if your users are asking about something completely new that is not part of what came in that package. So we want to identify that and we want to highlight it to you. We also spend a lot of time measuring, right? What is working really well and what is not working really well? Where are some of the opportunities for improvement and making that very clear for our customers? So that's one angle, which is sort of talking a little bit from a technical perspective on what it takes to sort of build and maintain these conversational AI systems. I think another aspect of it is that with the advent of all of this data, not only all the data that exists out there on the internet, but specifically at Casisto, we have usage data that's very relevant to financial and banking. I like to say sometimes that there's no question ever asked to a bank that Casisto has not seen before. So because we use that information both in our applications, but in our platform as well, it means that the barrier to build something new or to add to it comes significantly lower. Instead of needing, for example, to train a new intent, hundreds of examples, you could do it with as few as 10 examples and get something started and up and running that performs at the same level as things used to perform requiring 1,000 samples 2 years ago. So I think a mixture of us maturing our platform to ease the discoverability and automation, as well as the maintenance of these systems, combined with the use of data and technology to like reduce the barrier and complexity, have really opened up doors of what we can do and how quickly we can do it in this field.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And we're going to wrap up the session in a moment, but I'd like to go around the panel here and get everyone's closing thoughts. I'm going to start that process by saying, Sasha, it's interesting how you started off your response by talking about general conversational frameworks where, it does take a lot of uplifting, a lot of work to get them up and running and trained for the domain that you want to build an experience around, financial service as an example. So if at the end of the day, the bank's ultimate goal is to realize value as quickly as possible, delight their customers, surprise their customers. It is really meaningful in terms of taking on a technology and a product that is pre-trained, that understands the domain, understands the lingo of finance, and is proven to really know how to engage customers through a virtual assistant channel. We've also been talking a lot about virtual assistants, and I think only once in this conversation did we talk about a chatbot. And it's interesting because this event is all about chatbots, right? And within financial services, we really see them as being different. Chatbot is something that is very kind of reactive, FAQ based, not very personalized, not very intelligent or insightful. But yes, could be very simple to get up and running in a channel. Not sure that is really a means to an end in terms of surprising and delighting your clients. So, we really are focused on virtual assistants here in this conversation because we believe that is the strategy. Virtual assistants underpinned and powered by conversational AI really gets you to, everything we've been talking about over the past hour. And that is a new way of engaging customers that meets their demands, that surprises and delights them, and really does everything, like Ravi, you mentioned, everything from, helping to deal with costs, to augment workforce, to provide opportunities of revenue and engagement that previously was unimaginable. So with that said, why don't we go around the panel here and get some closing thoughts and wrap up this session. Ravi, why don't we start with you and get your thoughts?
Sure. I think my closing thought is that at the end of the day, with all of the various functionalities and features we're giving customers, we've got to realize that we are still custodians. We're trusted custodians of their money, of their livelihoods, of their financial futures. And so they look to us to be able to deliver experiences, capabilities in a secure way, but also, if you just take it down to the most practical ways, they want to be able to figure out, how do I do something new for the first time on your channel? But more importantly, there may be certain tasks that I don't typically do, but when I need to do it, like for example, if I don't know where my card is and I desperately need to block that or freeze that, I want to be able to find out where that is immediately. I don't want to have to sort of fumble around with buttons and look for it. And that's really where the virtual assistant comes into its own. It's the ability to give a trusted source of information to be able to say, yes, don't worry, you can do it right now. Click here, we'll get it done for you. And that gives a lot of confidence and certainly eases the user's experience. So the virtual assistant concept, I think, certainly I think we're going to be amazed if we sit here, if we regather in a year's time and have this conversation. It would be incredibly interesting to see what we're talking about then, because I think it's moving so quickly. But I think the most important thing here is that this is allowing us to offer really great customer-centric experiences that are going to advance and enhance the usability of our digital channels. So we're very excited by this.
That's great. Thank you for that, Ravi. Justin, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I mean, key thing for me really is how fast this space is evolving. I mean, if I cast my mind back to when we started to where we are today, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. To Ravi's points, in 12 months, let's see. I think conversational AI will be ubiquitous across a whole range of different services, including financial services. So I think the future is exciting from that perspective. So yeah, I need to put a pin in that and see what happens in 12 months. But yeah, I can't see it stopping at this point. I'll close on that.
Great. Well, we'll definitely do this again in 12 months. Sasha.
Well, I'm going to have to sell my beef here real quick, but I think as you are thinking about rolling out conversational AI in your bank or in your institution, much like I cycle sometimes. So if you decided to go cycling for 160 kilometers in one day, here in the US, we call it the 100-miler. Would you take your single speed bicycle, or would you take a bicycle that's specialized for riding multiple hours and you can go at 20 miles an hour the entire time? So think carefully about the tool that you pick to deploy this in, because we're not all equal, and some will really help you succeed on that journey.
That's great, Sasha. Thank you for that. And thank you for all our viewers for joining for the past hour. I hope you definitely found this session to be productive. We absolutely enjoyed spending the time with you. If you'd like to learn more about everything or anything we've talked about, or if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to our colleagues at Blue Turtle or any of us here at Casisto. Again, for the panelists, thank you very much and really appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.